So this isn't a video I was planning on making, but last week the county I live in actually got hit by a tornado. And one of the houses that was the hardest hit house was actually my grandma. So her house is literally the cover photo for a lot of news stations. Like before I get into anything else, she's fine. She got bruised up pretty bad, like she's still hurting and she was in the house when it got hit, but she's alright. So what I wanted to talk about in this video was there was a lot of gear that I really should have had that I didn't. And there was some stuff that was really useful that I'm glad I did have, and I'll cover that too. I know this was like a one-of-one localized disaster emergency situation, but I think it can be a good proxy for a lot of other things to show you kind of what's useful and what's not in an actual disaster. I know a lot of guys on YouTube keep basically an entire Bass Pro Shop in their truck. That's not me, and that's very obvious as I go into some of the stuff I didn't have that I wish I did. So like I said, a lot of this is stuff I did wrong, but lessons that can be learned. And it's not like I needed a trauma kit and somebody was seriously hurt and I didn't have one. Like, nothing really bad came of it. Most of it was inconvenience or just stuff that I could have seen being really useful. So how this played out is about 5 minutes after the tornado siren stopped, I got a call from my dad saying that my grandma's house was damaged, but I kind of thought he meant like siding tore off, like some shingles damage, that kind of stuff, just like an insurance claim. But then about 5 minutes later, he called and said, she's fine. It's always kind of worrying when they start off with that. But said her house wasn't livable. At this point, I kind of realized, I think he's downplaying the situation to me. I should probably go out there. I live in a pretty small town, and her house is like 10 to 15 minutes away, so it wasn't that big of a deal just to run over and make sure everything was okay. So I basically just threw on some work boots, took my little like man purse EDC bag, and then stuff I already had on me or stuff that was already in my car and headed over there. Which that immediately brings me to the first thing I should have had in my car and I didn't, which was a way to charge my phone. So I have an old car and it doesn't have an outlet that actually works that can charge my phone. And when I got over there, the power to the entire neighborhood was off, so I didn't really have a way to charge it. And my phone has a pretty subpar battery life, and I was listening to music on it earlier in the day, so I think I had around 25% left when I got out there, which isn't a lot of battery life for me. So there I was, entering a disaster area with almost no cell phone charge, which is not ideal. Granted, there was like 50 people around me who all had cell phones if someone needed to dial 911 or something. But if my phone would have died, I wouldn't have had my contact numbers. And then I obviously want my own phone. So my solution is I do actually have these little solar phone chargers that can hold about 4 charges of a phone. I'm going to keep them fully charged in each vehicle, along with the charge cables for every phone that I have in my family. That way, no matter what happens, we have a way to recharge our phone, even if the power is out in an area. I'm also gonna, in each car, keep a list of emergency contacts. So have my phone number on there, my wife's, my parents', my wife's workplace, my workplace, just so whoever's in whichever vehicle, even if we don't have our phone and have those contact lists, we can still call them, because this is 2024 and no one memorizes phone numbers anymore. So the next item that I didn't need, but thought I was going to, was basically a backpack to actually carry stuff in. So I had a decent amount of stuff in my car, but I didn't really have a good way to carry it. And when I got about a mile away from the neighborhood, the traffic got really bad. And like I said, I live in a small town where there's normally no traffic at all. So I thought that meant like a power line was down or somebody's shed got thrown onto the road by the tornado. So this wasn't the case. Traffic was still moving, just slowly. I think people basically stopping to look at the damage. So I could drive up to the neighborhood, but I didn't think that was going to be the case. So I want something so I can throw all my stuff in there, park my car somewhere, and walk or run. So I will be buying for each car with the different stuff in there some kind of medium-sized backpack. Doesn't need to be anything fancy. Just something I could use to throw everything into. So a good caveat here is if you don't have some kind of handicap and you don't have the physical fitness to run or walk for at least a mile or two, I would start training for that. Because like I said here, I would have hated to not have been in shape to actually get to where I needed to go and then get back to my car. You can't always just drive everywhere. Like for me, I was very confident if I needed to park and go 1.5 miles, I wasn't in the least bit worried about that. So when I got up to the house, my grandma was in the driveway, just sitting in a lawn chair basically. And this seems backwards when you're showing up to somewhere where a tornado just went through, but my trauma kit wasn't useful at all, did not even remotely need it. What was useful was my first aid or my boo-boo kit, which had like disinfectants and band-aids and stuff like that. Because a lot of people had cuts and bruises that needed cleaned up. This isn't me saying not to have a trauma kit, obviously. If you need one, you definitely need one. Just here it wasn't useful, which is a good thing. The next item that I'm glad I had was a flashlight. So I had this little Smith & Wesson flashlight. I've literally used it for over 10 years. You can tell it has a lot of wear on it. I know this isn't a brand I would normally recommend, but it has held up really well. Like I said, I've used it for a decade. And I had a Streamlight Stylus Pro as a backup. So I'm going to rag on our local law enforcement here. Because across from my grandma's house was another house that had a ton of damage. Like you could tell part of the roof was destroyed. And like stuff was knocked over in it. And there was an off-duty police officer who had his vest on, who was going around asking people if they were okay or if they needed anything, which is great. Like, I'm glad he was doing that even though he wasn't on duty. But the thing that kind of got me is he pointed to that house and said, hey, does anyone know if he's okay? And this neighborhood is mostly old people. And someone said there was an old man that lived there that lived alone. This officer asked if anyone had checked on him or knew if he was all right. Everybody said no. And the officer's response was basically like, well, I hope he's okay, and started walking the other way. So I basically said, like, well, I want to go make sure nobody's in there. And the officer basically responded, okay, that's great, let me know if you see anything, and then walked off. So I went over, the front door was blown open, so you could just walk in. Like, I could see that when I was talking to the officer. So I just walked in. Basically, it was a pretty small house. You could just walk in and see both bedrooms and the bathrooms where somebody would have been. Didn't see anybody. Later on, figured out that the dude went over to a neighbor's house, so he was totally fine. Like, nobody was actually in there. But still, it was helpful to have that flashlight because the power was out. I really couldn't have seen otherwise. So this brings me to another item that in a disaster like that was actually really useful, was actually a mask. Like, just one of the cheap, like, COVID-19 masks. And that's because I didn't realize when multiple houses are basically destroyed, blown insulation is absolutely everywhere. Like, it looked like it was snowing outside. And this might not bother most people. I have pretty bad sinuses and allergies. So I started coughing and started getting a stuffy nose after I was there for about an hour. But then somebody showed up with like a box of just those cheap masks everybody was wearing. I put one on and then I was basically fine after that. So this isn't gonna like save somebody's life, but if it keeps you from getting sick, I think it's worth having. Like, I just can't imagine that stuff's healthy to breathe in. So the next part of this video is not so much like the emergency response stuff, but some of the boring things afterwards. So the entire time I was growing up, my grandma ran an antique shop. And her house is full of like old collectible antiques. And that's stuff that I know insurance would pay her out for it, but you can't just go to Walmart and order like antique furniture. So we wanted to try to protect that because she had 2 giant holes in her house, her roof was partly ripped off, and it was supposed to rain for the next couple days. So we took all the antique stuff we could and tried to put that in the garage because 1, we could lock it up, and 2, that part of the house wasn't damaged, so there wouldn't be any rain in there. The thing that would have been really useful here would have been a pair of gloves, because I literally had some laid out to take over there and just completely forgot them when I got in the car. I know that sounds stupid that I would have forgot that, but when you get a call that someone's house has been hit by a tornado, you just kind of like rush out the door thinking you have everything. And I don't want to do that YouTuber, oh, I did everything perfectly. Obviously, this video is all stuff I basically messed up, just so you know what not to do. So in her house was broken glass just everywhere. That's why they would have been really useful. Luckily, I found some in her garage and just used those. But if I would have been going out and needed to like clear some debris off the road or something, that would have been nice too. Again, that's one of those items, doesn't take up any space, doesn't weigh anything, super cheap, and you need them constantly. So the last item I want to talk about is a multi-tool. I didn't use mine a whole lot, but there were a few things that I needed to open and needed a pocket knife. And even if I didn't have a knife, the Leatherman would have worked for that. And there was some stuff like bending down nails that were sticking out, or unscrewing stuff from the wall. Just little small tasks that it was pretty helpful to have. I don't think I need to go into a whole lot of detail there. I think most people watching a video like this are gonna know multi-tools are just generally a good thing to have on you. So I know most of this stuff was pretty obvious. There's not some crazy high-tech thing that I needed that I didn't have. And it's stuff I should have had in the car anyways, but I just didn't. So it's all stuff that I knew I wanted to put in the cars anyways and just never did. So this was kind of a nice wake-up call to I really need to think about my car kit more. And that's one thing I'm going to be doing over the next month or two, is really getting that honed in. So I'll probably do videos in the future about what I'm keeping in each vehicle. So if you like that kind of content, make sure to subscribe. Thank you for watching.